Okay. My name is Matt. I'm an alcoholic.
Amen.
I want to stand because I get really passionate about Alcoholics Anonymous, and I don't much like sitting down. I was separated from alcohol on October 8th of 2015, and I say I was separated from alcohol because it was not really my choice. I later found out that I was separated by a power greater than myself. I have a home group. It is the Wolf Pack. It's a men's meeting here in Flagstaff. We meet on Tuesday nights from 7 to 8 and Thursday nights from 7 to 8. I have a sponsor. I meet with weekly to every other week, depending on if he's in town. And I sponsor other guys. I stay in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm what some people might consider a big book thumper, because I was also sponsored by a big book thumper, and I have found the program of recovery in the first 164 pages of this book. So if you don't have one yet, get one. And don't be afraid, because most of it's like stories and stuff in the back. But the first 164 are the clear-cut directions, specifically on how we recovered. I am going to talk about God tonight, and so I will refer to the big book and where it says that, when I speak to you of God, I mean your conception of God, right? In looking at the spiritual experience on page 567, it tells us that, in light of our experience, that any alcoholic who is willing to honestly face their problems, can recover. That's a big deal. But it says just so long as we don't close our mind off to all things spiritual, right? So when I speak to you of God, I speak of your conception of God, and I'll be talking to you about my conception of God. So when I have an opportunity to speak in front of members of Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't go into great depth on my war stories. I found in my experience when I was new, the war stories, people's war stories were the very thing that was, in my mind, keeping me out of meetings. And my alcoholic mind was telling me, I'm not an alcoholic. You guys had more DUIs. You guys went to more rehabs. You guys clearly have problems. I don't. Now, mind you, my mind was always trying to tell me that it wasn't an alcoholic, and I later find out that that's part of my alcoholic insanity. But what I will share with you is my experience through the steps, and I will also share with you, things out of the big book that I think we can all relate to, and most of those things were, some of the ways that I felt. The book had a magical way of putting into words certain things which I could not understand until I found the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can be found on page 21 of the big book. I am the real alcoholic. It describes us as I can be the finest fellow in the world, but you put alcohol in me for a day, and I become dangerously and disgustingly antisocial. That's me to a T. The Jekyll and Hyde. And in fact, the book also says that I'm practically normal in every way, except for when it comes to alcohol, I'm incredibly selfish and dishonest. And that was one thing that I was really confused about when I came into when I started going to meetings. Was it seemed like there were people who were trying to paint this picture that alcoholics were like different in every other way than normal human beings, and I found that that's not true. And in fact, the book brings it up a number of times that I'm practically normal in every way, but with the way that my body reacts to alcohol, and with alcohol, I become incredibly selfish and dishonest. If you got in the way of how I wanted to drink, I didn't want you in my life, bottom line. So I pushed pretty much everybody out of my life who had any kind of opinion on my drinking. My drinking career didn't start until after I was out of high school. But man, when I found it, I loved it and I ran with it. I can only I've described in the doctor's opinion, the sense of ease and comfort that came when I took that drink. It got rid of the restless, irritable discontent. Now, I am not an alcoholic because I'm restless and irritable. I'm not an alcoholic because, I've heard some people say, I'm a square peg in a round hole. These are not things that make me an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic because of the reaction that alcohol has when I do take it into my system. And I'm an alcoholic because even knowing that it has a bad reaction, I still pick up that drink. Even knowing that I have an allergy to alcohol, I have this peculiar mental twist where I pick up that first drink because my mind tells me that it's going to be different. And I didn't know this stuff before I started getting into the big book. So I had pushed everybody out of my life, including my wife at the time. She had left again for the third time, and this time it was because I got physically abusive. Again, I am dangerously and disgustingly antisocial when I put alcohol into my body. But that wasn't enough. Even then, it was just like, oh, maybe I need to lay off the hard stuff, So I can be found on page, in chapter 3, where it talks about through every form of self-deception and experimentation. I was trying to prove myself an exception to the rule. I was trying to prove that I was not an alcoholic, And then I would make these deals with myself. Okay, no hard alcohol during the week. Just on the weekends, I'll stick to beer only. Can't do Coke because then I always end up with hard alcohol. Maybe I'll just drink wine But the funny thing is that I'm the kind of alcoholic that I would, at one point in time, I had wine memberships to a number of different places up and down California and Oregon, Washington, and I drank these expensive wines, yet I would still sneak out to the garage and drink vodka out of a plastic bottle. That's the kind of alcoholic that I am, because the wine would never get me there where I needed to get, or the kind of alcoholic when we would go to a restaurant, I would make sure I knew where the bar was, knew where the bathroom was, and I would make sure that my wife's back was to the bar. So that I could drink a beer during dinner like a gentleman, and I could get up and go to the bathroom and have the bartender pour me, a straight Stoli, and then put it down quick. And then she probably wondered why I was going to the bathroom 2 or 3 times during dinner, But so I pushed everybody out of my life. I was very lucky in that my place of business. It was filled with sober alcoholics. There was a good, I think it felt like half, but there was, at least a good 30-40% of people that worked at this company were sober alcoholics. In the beginning, I didn't want anything to do with them. There were those of us who drank and partied. It was a sales organization, and then there were those who didn't. And they would walk, some of them I didn't want to have anything to do with because they were, walking around like, God is good, it's like, calm down, it was, so I knew where to turn when I finally realized that I had a problem. And I wish that I could tell you that the first time that I actually went to somebody and admitted that I had a problem, I wish I could tell you that it was because I was ready to change. But I'm pretty sure it was because I was still going to try to get her back, one more time. So I went into the CEO's office, and because he was a sober alcoholic, and he was a man that I looked up to. I wanted what he had. At that time, I definitely wanted more than just his sobriety, because the guy was doing pretty well for himself. I didn't realize till later that that's not what we're talking about when we say we want what if you want what we have and you're willing to go to any length to get it. But I told him, I said, Rick, I think I'm an alcoholic. I have a problem with alcohol, and he said okay. He's like, he linked me up with a younger guy who had been in and out of the rooms. He probably only had a couple weeks sober at the time. His name was Josh. And he said, you're going to go to a meeting with Josh tonight. And I said, tonight doesn't work for me. I still had one drink in me left. So that was October 7th of 2015. And the funny thing is that for the first 30 to 60 days, I was hanging on to October 7th, 2015 as my sobriety date, even though I knew full well that after I walked out of that office, having admitted to my boss that I was an alcoholic, that I went straight to the liquor store. But I still held on to that date as my sobriety date because, man, in the first couple days, and congratulations on 2 months, Josh, and a year, that's a long time not to drink. So congratulations to you, Mark. In telling you someone that I had a week instead of 6 days was a big deal to me. And so I held on to those, and I kept taking dirty chips for a couple months until I finally got honest, because I'm like, why am I hanging on to this extra day? So the actual day was October 8th, 2015. So that was it was Wednesday when I walked into his office. That was a Thursday when I actually, when I went to my first meeting and I didn't have a drink that day. So Josh and I went to what I guess was a young people's meeting. I felt really awkward and out of place because I, didn't really feel like I was young, and I felt like cliquey. But again, my mind's trying to tell me that I don't belong here. You guys are different than me. You guys have you don't understand. But I was just rolling with it at this point, and I was definitely getting restless, irritable, and discontented at this point, right? Because it had been, 16, 18 hours since I had had a drink, and we sat down in the meeting. It was a big meeting, and then like we did tonight, people went around and introduced themselves, and so Josh is coaching me through this, and he's like, okay, so you're, he's like, I know that you did coke and stuff too, so you can say, my name's Matt, I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and I'm like, okay, I got this, So it gets to me, and I stand up and I say, hello, my name's Matt, I'm an alcoholic and an addict, Something profound happened. That was the first step, that me admitting for the first time out loud. I later found out that my sponsor said, Matt, when you say you're an alcoholic and an addict, that's like saying I only eat vegetables and I'm a vegan. He said. So after that, we just kind of stuck to alcoholic. But something profound happened then, and I wasn't completely aware of it at that time. Because most of the rest of the meeting, all I heard was, it was like the old Charlie Brown cartoons when the mom's talking. Wah, 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 blah, blah, blah. And then I heard countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. Wow. Countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people, and it still gives me chills. And that cut through. I heard that. I'm like, wow, I've never heard, that's what I was feeling. That's what I had tried, So that was a big moment for me. But, one of the big reasons that I went to that meeting is because I heard that you guys sold literature, and I wanted to make sure that I got myself a book. Not because I had any plan on reading it at that time, but because I wanted to make sure it was sitting on the counter so that when she came back to the house to grab clothes or whatever, she could see that, look at what I'm doing for us. Look what I'm doing. It's going to be different this time. I even put the bookmark in, reasonably, I didn't want to go too deep, I want to make it look like it, like it's realistic, But something happened when that cut through, and in California, some of you may know, they read a portion of chapter 3 in a lot of meetings, and that's why I heard that, countless vain attempts to prove that we could drink like other people, and I wanted to see more like that, So I ended up getting into the doctor's opinion that night, and I read through it, and I got to the part where it started talking about this being an allergy, and I could really wrap my brain around that. I had never looked at it that way before because I have a milk allergy, and it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. I get it, but. I have no problem staying away from milk. What's the problem? And then it goes on to tell me the real problem centers in my mind. Because if it was just the allergy, and I knew that it was, and I knew I had an allergy to alcohol, then I wouldn't touch it. Just like somebody who, say, has a peanut allergy wouldn't touch peanuts because they would go into anaphylactic shock, right? So what's this peculiar mental twist? So I wanted to read more because I was curious about this. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks when I read These men were no longer drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving that was beyond their mental control. Bam. I'm like, that's it. That is exactly what I've been feeling. I have not been able to put it into words. I had, and the book clearly explained exactly the way I was feeling. I was no longer drinking to escape. I was drinking to overcome a craving that was beyond my mental control. And by the way, that blows out of the water any idea that there's any such thing as a trigger. Okay? Because for me, as a real alcoholic, life is a trigger. It doesn't matter. And in fact, the book addresses this, and it talks about triggers. It doesn't use the word trigger, but it says, let's call it a trivial excuse in the light of what normally happens when we pick up a trivial excuse. That's all that is. It's a trigger. But there's no such thing as a trigger for me because I was not drinking to escape. I was drinking to overcome a craving that was beyond my control. It was beyond my mental control. And then I took that a further step in the book. I'd like to say that I was hooked at that point and I wanted more. So I found, eventually I found what would become my home group, which was the Monday Night Men's Stag in Simi Valley, California. And this was a meeting that was full of men who were sponsoring other men, who were sponsoring them out of the big book, who were living in step 10, 11, and 12, and were staying sober while doing it. And these were not the kind of guys who, when I came into the meeting, said, "We're going to love you until you love yourself." They didn't, because that's nowhere in the book. What they did tell me, which comes right out of chapter 7, they said, "Matt, it's imperative that you put the welfare of other people in front of your own. It's imperative that you put the welfare of other people in front of your own." They said, "You are selfish and self-centered at the core. You've been a taker your whole life. It's time for you to start giving back." And I'm so grateful that I found men like that in Alcoholics Anonymous and found a home group. So it was there that I found my sponsor. And as I mentioned earlier, my sponsor is what some people would call a big book thumper. And again, I'm so grateful for that. We started going through the book. I had already gotten a bit of a head start, but we still read from the cover page to together, word for word. When it told us to write, we wrote. When it told us to pray, we prayed. We followed the first 164. And even from the cover page, like I said, where it says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. Yet I was going to meetings where you weren't allowed to say the word recovered, which was strange because it appears in the big book like 70 times or more in various forms. Recovered, recovery, And one of the things that my sponsor and I did was we went through the book, and as we did, we looked at areas where the word recovery came up. We looked at the word problems in the singular form. We looked at the word insanity and insane, because what he was trying to establish, what he was trying to help me understand is, what exactly did it mean to be insane? When it was in step 2, where it says, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. What exactly does that mean? Because I was super confused about that too. I was in meetings, and I would hear people identify who had a ton of time saying, "I'm so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm still insane." And I'm like, I was losing a lot of hope because I'm like, I don't want to be insane, forever. What is this insanity? And so to understand, what does the book mean by being restored to sanity? And when we started looking at it, because my sponsor explained that from the cover page to page 5960, when we're into chapter 5, that's step 1 and step 2. And basically in there, I'm supposed to, through the stories and through the description of the alcoholic and through, the chapter to the agnostics, I'm supposed to come to establish that, not only am I powerless over alcohol, that my life had become unmanageable, but I'm also supposed to come to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. So I really needed to understand, what is it to be insane? And it describes it beautifully in the book. In fact, it says, we don't know what else to call this, so we're going to call it plain insanity. Word for word in the book. We don't know what else to call this, so we're going to call it plain insanity. And they were talking about when Jim thought that it was going to be a good idea to mix whiskey with milk. It's going to be different insanity. It's going to be different this time. As you guys remember the story of Jim, right? He is now working for an auto dealership that he used to own, which he lost because he's a drunk. He just got his family back. And the story starts out with, he was irritated, all went well for a while, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And so Jim goes out to a place that he used to frequent. I'm sure he used to drink out there, and he was just going to get a sandwich, right? So, but he really thought, that it was going to be different this time if I just mix whiskey with milk. And the book says we don't know what else to call it, so we're going to call it insanity. So that's one of the alcoholic insanities, or the alcoholic mind. And that was the other thing that I was super confused about, because I would hear people talking about, that's my alcoholism. Oh, that's my, they would do something stupid, do something mean, buy too much stuff on Amazon. That's my alcoholism. And it's like, no, that's not. Like, your alcoholism, according to the big book, is the insanity which precedes the first drink. It's my mind telling me that it's going to be different this time. Or like in Fred's case, who's the guy, the businessman, the self-knowledge guy. Like, he loses everything, and he finally gets his family back, and some guys from Alcoholics Anonymous are talking with him, and he's like, I know about myself now. Thanks for the information, guys. I got this. I've handled every other problem. I've licked every other problem. I can definitely lick this one too with self-knowledge. He thought that self-knowledge was going to be enough. And for him, it was, it even says that he went on a business trip, which he had gone on before, since he had stopped drinking. And it was the end of a perfect day. It said, not a cloud on the horizon. With no triggers there for Fred, right? Not a cloud on the horizon. End of a perfect day. And then he just walked across the threshold of the hotel, and he thought, a cocktail might be nice with dinner. And the book later goes on to describe this as the mental blank spot. So we looked at that and we realized, okay, here's the other insanity, right? It's going to be different this time, or the mental blank spot. That's my alcoholic thinking. Or like in Bill's story, where it's just, he pounds on the bar and was just like, oh, heck with it anyway. And that's, as some people call it, the F-its. Or just, that's the trivial excuse. Pick your excuse, for us to drink again. And knowing full well, the disaster, the pain that it's going to cause. So as we went through this process, it became clear to me what it actually meant to have my sanity returned. And it meant that I was going to react sanely and normally when I was confronted with alcohol. And we look at that later on page 84 and 85, where it actually says that, like, by this point, sanity has returned. It says, we're not fighting it anymore. We're that we've been placed in a position of neutrality. Like that. I wish somebody would have told me that when I first came into the rooms, that like you can be neutral to alcohol. Like, I am neutral today to alcohol. I don't have to fight it. I don't have to avoid it. I'm completely neutral to it. I like to compare it to black licorice because, I don't particularly like black licorice, but I don't have to avoid it in the store. I am neutral to it. It doesn't affect me one way or another, Now, granted, it tells me that this neutrality is contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. Even when Ebby, Bill's friend who brought the message to him first, Ebby told him, he said, look, if you fail to enlarge your spiritual life through through work with others and self-sacrifice, like, you're not going to survive the certain low spots ahead, And this warning comes up often, right? Even again, and with Jim, he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. He was not prepared for the moment when he was faced with that first drink, because the book is clear and it tells me that there's going to be a place and time where you guys aren't going to be there to help me, to keep me from that drink. You guys aren't going to be able to stand between me and that drink. That power, that's going to have to come from something greater than myself, And, for me, I was struggling with that when we got to step 3, was struggling with this idea of a power, this conception of God. I had a conception of God growing up, but I certainly didn't, want to have anything to do with that conception of God, when I was ready to get sober, because I didn't really approve of the way that he was running things down here, so I didn't want to have anything to do with it, But as I mentioned in the spiritual experience, it tells me that I can only be defeated with an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. I can only be defeated with an attitude of intolerance, or belligerent denial. It just says all I have to do is become willing to believe, And for those who might be struggling with a power greater than yourself, I got to tell you, like, an easy one is gravity, because I don't think there's anybody in this room who can tell me that they're more powerful than gravity. This is a power, and it's greater than us, and it's enough of a start, right? And that it's like, even with the when we got into chapter 4, I told my sponsor, I'm not an agnostic, so we can go ahead and skip over this one. And he's like, no, well, you're going to read it. We're going to read it, and it's got some of the best nuggets in there. I love that chapter. So because the way that we did the steps, they were as the clear-cut directions as they were laid out in the book. What we did for step 3 was, as soon as we got to it, when we got to that page 59, and it said, being convinced we were at step 3. I had to ask myself at that point, am I convinced? Am I convinced that I'm at step 3? The original manuscript said, being convinced we're at step 3, and if you're not, go back and read it again. And then I think it even said, and if you're still not, after that point, then throw it away. So I was convinced that I was at step 3, and just as it said in the big book, even though it said the words were quite optional, we got on our knees, we held hands. Which was weird, and we read the 3rd step prayer, and I'd like to tell you that I had like this magical like white light experience, but I did not. It kind of felt good. It was more awkward than anything else, because I'm like, who's watching? But the idea is that and my sponsor made it very clear, this step, unless followed by immediate action, was going to have little effect. So step 3 by itself really doesn't do anything, unless followed by immediate action. And that didn't mean that he was like, okay, go ahead and sit on this now for a month or 2, and then we'll get into your 4th step. No, we got into it right away. And he said, here's the deal. He said, the 4th step is going to take you 3 hours, or it'll take you 3 hours in a week, or it'll take you 3 hours in a month, or it'll take you 3 hours in a year. In other words, it's just going to take you 3 hours. So just like get to work on it, And he asked me, do you want the relief? Do you want the relief? And I certainly wanted the relief, So I got to work on it, and in following the instructions in the book, we started with the first column, just the grudge list. And I got to put down everybody that I was like, yeah, you, and I'm mad at you, and that was the fun part, And then we got to the next column, where now I've got to look at, okay, well, why? It's just like, oh, you hurt me, my feelings are hurt, and working through that, and then get to the other column, the areas of my life that it affected, and then getting into, starting to really look at what my part was in it. And the best way that I've ever heard it explained, my sponsor said, this process is like a tomato worm. And for those of you who don't know what a tomato worm is, it looks exactly like a leaf, and it's found on a tomato plant. Shocking, But and you can't, by looking at the plant, you can't see where the tomato worm is. You actually have to follow the trail of poop to find the tomato worm. And so what we're doing in this process with step 4 is we are following the trail of poop, right? All the people that I've hurt, all these resentments, all that, we're following this trail to find out what the defective character is, to find out these different manifestations of self, which the book talks about, also called the defects of character. And we're going to find out what those are. And spoiler alert, but we all have the same ones, right? It's all fear, it's all anger, it's all resentment, dishonesty. We all got the same ones to varying degrees, but they're the same ones. So once we find those, and he said, and then we're going to do, in doing step 5, the idea is that we're going to clear all of this garbage out of the way, because currently it is standing in the way of a deeper, more meaningful relationship with the God of your understanding, and it's standing in the way of a deeper, more meaningful relationship with those in your life. And he said, so we're gonna get rid of that stuff. And he's like, and then you're not gonna have to do this step ever again, because you got to stop thinking about yourself. You got to stop writing about yourself. You got to stop doing inventories. Like, you got to stop. You got to turn your thought to someone you can help. Okay, because we do this one time, because if we do it right, then and we learn how to live in step 10, 11, and 12, which we'll get to in a minute, then you don't have to ever do this fourth step again. So we went to it. I had no problem telling him my whole life story, as the book says. I didn't hold anything back. There was a huge relief to it. And then we didn't waste any time. He said, okay, now, according to the big book, we followed it. Then he said, you're going to go home. You're going to take the book down from the shelf. And you're gonna meditate for an hour. You're gonna review the first 5 proposals. You're gonna make sure that you haven't, that you haven't skimped on the mortar, like it says. That you've done everything honestly and thoroughly. And he said 6 and 7. This is between you and God. He said, I can't help you with these 2. Because as it does in the book, we roll right from 5 to that hour of contemplation and reflection right into 6 and 7. Because by that point, we were clear on what my I was clear on what my defects of character were, because my sponsor and I discussed them, and I was willing to have God remove them, and then I asked him to remove them. And step 6 and 7 happened like that, and the next day, we were back into action on step 8. And my sponsor, as I'm making my step 8 list, making a list of all people who I'd harmed and became willing to make amends to them all, I'm writing next to it phone call or letter, and he's like, what part of direct amends do you not understand? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, direct amends is like in person. I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, unless otherwise impossible, that's what direct amends is. And he said, besides, you don't get ahead of yourself. Right now, we're just making a list and becoming willing to make amends to them. Step 9, I could spend hours talking to you about so many amazing experiences that I had with step 9, but I will share one of them with you with my ex-wife, who the first time I did a step 9, I hadn't even done step 1 and 2 yet, and it was against sponsor direction, and I was only about 60 days sober, and I called her up, and I'm like, I'm going to meet you. I want to meet you at Starbucks. Meet me in the parking lot, and she was there, and I jumped out, and I'm like, so I'm in a 12-step program, and as part of my program of recovery, I need to clean up the wreckage of my past, and I'm sorry for choosing alcohol over our marriage. And she's like bawling, and she's like, I forgive you, and I'm like, that's not what this is about, and I like hop in the car and I leave, right? It was like a drive-by step 9, What happened is that several years into my sobriety, I had gotten so sick of that, over that. We weren't talking anymore. I saw her car, it wasn't her car, but it was a white RAV4, and it was everywhere, everywhere. And then I started going to meetings, and I was hearing again and again people talking about step 9, and I'm just like, and then my, I heard it explained to me that, people were talking about and then I asked them, what did I leave out? What can I do to make it right? And I'm like, I didn't do these things. The best way, the way my sponsor described it, is making an amends is if I were to have been throwing garbage over the fence for years, over the fence into my neighbor's yard, right? Making amends would me be going over there, picking up the garbage, showing it to my neighbor and saying, this garbage that is in your yard, I threw this in your yard. It was wrong of me to throw this in your yard. You didn't deserve to have me throw this in your yard. Other than me cleaning all this crap up, is there anything else that I can do to make it right? And is there anything that I'm leaving out? Is there any other way that I've harmed you that I'm not aware of? And that is an amends. And again, it's not about you, Matt. It's about them. It's about making right what was wrong. Now, I may reap the benefits from it, as well. But it's not about me. It's about making right what was wrong. And we finally did have a chance to connect. And I had to write a letter at first just to establish the meeting. And then we sat down and I did it right. And then the hardest thing for me to hear was when I asked, is there anything that I left out? She said, when you were drinking, it didn't, and you were abusive, it didn't hurt as much as when you weren't drinking and you were abusive. She said, I could blame it on the alcohol when you weren't, but in between drinks is when you hurt me the most. And that was hard. That was hard to hear. But she needed to tell me that, and I needed to hear that. And then I got to ask her, what can I do to make it right? And I was fully prepared at that time, even if she said, we need to go to counseling and work on this. Like, I was fully prepared to do whatever she asked me. And all she said is, no matter where we're at in life, no matter who we're with, all I ask is that we remain friends. And to this day, she's one of my best friends. And even after the courts, even after the courts told me I didn't need to pay her anymore, I still continue to, because I want to. It's just one, many miracles that this program has, with the amends process, and then in learning with my sponsor how to live in step 10, 11, and 12, and then that's something that I still talk with my sponsor about today, is living in step 10, 11, and 12. Because some people call those the maintenance steps. And I think that that's wrong. I think that they're the growth steps. Because in fact, when we get to step 10, it says, we have entered the realm of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So I believe in step 10, 11, and 12 is where I try to grow in understanding and effectiveness. That's the reason I don't ever have to do a fourth and fifth step again if I live in step 10. Because 10, it reminds me that I need to continue to watch for those manifestations of self when they crop up. Resentment, fear. Fear's the one I always forget about, because I think step 10 is just like if I step on somebody's toes and I got to make an amends. But fear's the one that I get plagued with the most, and I got to remember, there's a formula for this. There's a formula for this, and it goes over in the book again and again. I ask God to remove it. I tell somebody about it, I ask God to remove it, and I turn my thoughts to somebody I can help. If I've hurt somebody in the process, I make an amends. But I ask God to remove it, I tell somebody about it, and I turn my thoughts to somebody I can help. Whether it be fear or any other manifestation of self. And gosh darn it if it doesn't work, And I don't do it perfectly. I'm still on the phone. I work on the phone for a living, and especially these days, more often than not, product does not show up when it's supposed to because of some kind of shipping error, and I'll get on the phone at like 5 o'clock in the morning and like chew out one of my vendors, and it's not even their fault. UPS messed up and something didn't arrive the same day, and I guarantee you, before I'm even hanging up that phone, I'm like, I'm dialing to call them back. Hey, you didn't deserve that. You don't deserve to be talked to like that just because I'm having a bad morning. It's not fair that I dumped that on you. You don't deserve that. Making it right. And I know it changes their day, and it certainly changes mine. I was all wrapped up in fear earlier today. And it's like a new day after I had a chance to pray about it, talk about it. I sat down and I met with my sponsor today. And now I'm getting a chance to be of service. So, doing the formula, tell somebody about it. Ask God to remove it. Turn your thoughts to somebody you can help. And the only thing I can really say about step 11, because it's going to look different for all of us, is that there's only one wrong way to do step 11, and that's not to seek. That is not to seek. It just it says we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. If they wanted to say find or found, they would have. But they said sought. So the idea is for me to seek. My seeking is going to look different than your seeking. It's going to look different than your seeking. But the book encourages us to seek and to seek outside these rooms too. It even says, be quick to see where religious people are right. They've got a lot of great literature. That may not be for you. I read books on Buddhism. I read books on Christianity. I read books on, whatever. I'm hungry. I'm hungry for spirituality. I'm hungry for the seeking. I want to try to, the God that I understand today is completely different than the God that I understood at the beginning of this process, And that's the only thing that I can say about step 11. It's just the only wrong way to do it is to not seek. It's going to look different for all of us. I live in step 12 also. Like I said, I work with guys. I sponsor them. I myself meet with my sponsor. I truly believe, as it says at the beginning of chapter 7, that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking than intensive work with another alcoholic. It works when all else fails. It works when all else fails. You can't go wrong with that. And that doesn't just mean if maybe you're not ready to sponsor another person. It says intensive work with another alcoholic. That means you working with your sponsor, me working with my sponsor, me working with sponsees. That means being of service in a meeting, And we have these tools, and I'm so grateful that when you guys laid this kit of spiritual tools at my feet, and the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and to be able to walk through it, that I picked it up, and and I made it a part of my life, because I'm sober today not because I am doing this on my own. God has done for me what I cannot do for myself, what I was not able to do for myself, and this is but a daily reprieve that's contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. So, like my sponsor said, whatever I do today is not going to keep me sober tomorrow. So I'll get up tomorrow, and I'll try to live in step 10, 11, and 12, and I'll seek God. And thank you guys for letting me share.
Thank you.